For this video, we're going to be looking at the vertebral column. I'm going to look at all the different types of vertebrae, or at least try to. And for the first part, we're going to focus on the first two vertebrae of the cervical vertebrae. This first one is called the atlas. The atlas is the vertebra that articulates with the skull at the occipital condyle. This surface right here is the superior articular surface that is on either side of this very large hole called the vertebral foramen. And then lateral to that is the transverse foramen. So all cervical vertebrae have three holes. There's two transverse foramen and one vertebral foramen. The next most inferior vertebrae is called the axis. The axis has this projection, that's superior projection, called the dens, D-E-N-S. The atlas also has a large vertebral foramen and also lateral to that, transverse foramens. The next most inferior vertebra is the C3, or the cervical vertebrae number 3, and it has all the other structures that I've mentioned. There's the transverse foramen, the vertebral foramen, there's a superior articular surface. Two things that I haven't really mentioned in the past is that this part right here is a spinous process that projects posteriorly, and in this case this is a paired process, so it's called a bifid spinous process. And then this large structure right here is called the body of the vertebrae. In this case, the body of the vertebrae is always projecting facing anteriorly. If we go inferior now more on this, on our trek down the vertebral column, we're looking at the thoracic vertebrae. So we've done cervical vertebrae. Thoracic vertebrae have a large body and the vertebral canal, or vertebral foramen rather, and then the spinous process right down the midline. There's superior articular surfaces that are present in other vertebrae, but the things that are unique or present only on thoracic vertebrae is this surface right here called the costal facet, and this part right here is also a costal facet. This is on a transverse process. This is a transverse process, this is a transverse process, and this is a costal facet. This costal facet and that costal facet are points of articulation with the ribs. Continuing on down our trek down the vertebrae. Let me see. Let's go down there. This is lumbar 2. Lumbar 2, the second lumbar vertebrae, is a very large vertebra. It's got a very large vertebral body, as you notice. Hopefully you notice this. The vertebral foramen is beginning to narrow. It gets smaller. There's lateral projections, a transverse process, posterior projection, a spinous process. And the superior articular surface is slightly different than the others, than cervical and thoracic vertebrae, because in lumbar vertebrae, they project medially. And then the last vertebra that we're going to talk about is the sacral vertebrae. Sacral vertebrae are a group of fused vertebrae, and there's two parts to this. So there's the sacral vertebrae. This is an anterior view. You have the anterior sacral foramina, and then when you rotate it, posteriorly, you have the posterior sacral foramina. You have the median sacral crest. And once again, these vertebrae, there's 5 groups of vertebrae that are that you see here, and these 5 groups of vertebrae are fused together. The last surface that I want to point out here is called the auricular surface, and this is the point of articulation with the os coxae.